Well, folks, thanks very much for coming to our latest TESS seminar. TESS, of course, being our Center for Tropical, Environmental, and Sustainability Science at JCU, which is one of the real active centers, particularly here on the Cairns campus, although we engage with lots of people, including in Townsville and other places around. It's a real pleasure today to introduce Jules Seabright. Jules has very kindly stepped in. This is a little bit of an experiment for us because we've never had what happened to us before. We've never had what happened this week, which is that a speaker got ill, got COVID, and canceled the day before. And we've had people cancel the week before, and that sent us into a wild panic. So the day before, well, that was really had us running around. Huge thanks to Annabelle, who I just sort of said, Annabelle, it's a problem. Go take care of it and see if you can solve it. And she did. So great. We should probably apologize to Lori Lack, who runs, of course, the new Center on Invasive Species, because in a way, we're kind of poaching one of their speakers. But anyway, it's all fair in love and war, especially when you're sort of in panic mode, just trying to get ready to do another seminar. So anyway, turn things over to Jules now, and who's going to talk about the Wet Tropics Management Authority's Yellow Crazy Ant Eradication Program. Thanks, Jules.
Thanks so much for that intro. Really appreciate it. Can you all hear me okay? And those online, if you have any problems, please just let us know in the chat, and I'm sure I'll get a wave from the back row about it. What's even funnier about jumping in at the last minute on this is I've actually been on leave for a couple of weeks until yesterday, or actually until today. It's my first day back, so a very exciting way to start things. And I do apologize if I take any content from the speaker that's scheduled later from Lori's lab, but I think that there's so much information about this program. It's really got a long history. It's vast and complex that we'll have a lot to touch on across the talks and beyond that for conversations afterward. So thank you all for coming out today, and especially to those online as well. I saw some students. Great to have you in the crowd. So before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're living and working. In Cairns, that's the Gimoy Wallabari Dinji people. And south of Cairns, where we do a lot of our work, the Dulabad Mullumbari Dinji people. And in addition, we do a lot of work up the range in the mountains. So acknowledgements also to the 20 or more rainforest Aboriginal peoples groups active in that country. And I'd like to extend that respect and acknowledgement to all traditional owners and First Nations peoples in attendance today. I'd also like to just warn all attendees of this presentation that there is at least one image of people who have since died. So just to touch on what we covered in the introduction, my name is Jules. I'm working for the Wet Tropics Management Authority as part of the Yellow Crazy Ant Eradication Program, which has a massive and long-standing presence in this part of the world, and you're probably all of you already somewhat familiar with it. I also want to introduce just briefly Rachel Reese, the coordinator of our community task force active in the Kuranda area, who will be speaking to you a little bit later on our community engagement activities. But to first give you a little bit more information about the authority, who knows what the Wet Tropics Management Authority is? People who work with us don't count. I guess if there's anyone aware online. We don't necessarily have the strongest social media or public presence, but it's actually a very important group safeguarding one of Queensland's greatest natural assets. What we have here is the Wet Tropics of Queensland World Heritage Area, listed with UNESCO for its incredible biocultural values, biodiversity values, natural heritage values, immense beauty, and so many other values crammed into this relatively tiny area that it just makes sense to protect it because it's one of the most extraordinary on the planet. In fact, we were listed as the second most irreplaceable natural World Heritage Area on Earth. So that's more significant than a lot of the tropical rainforests with big names that get tossed around, which just drives home the importance of protecting the natural asset that we have here in North Queensland. It's really unusual and special. However, it's in danger from a number of different and intersecting threats, not the least of which is invasive species. And in the 2024 State of the Wet Tropics report, which is soon to be released, watch out for that one coming shortly. Invasive species are listed as one of the top 3 most significant threats to this World Heritage Area. That's invasive weeds, pathogens, plants, parasites, vertebrates like cats, which are very famous, and of course, invertebrates, which don't always get the attention they deserve as very significant invasive species. So one of those is the yellow crazy ant, and the authority has responded to the threats of yellow crazy ants in the World Heritage Area with the Yellow Crazy Ant Eradication Program. But to explain what we do, I first need to explain what is the nature of the threat. It's going to probably be easier if I ask who isn't familiar with yellow crazy ants, at least a little bit. You can't raise your hand. So the yellow crazy ant is a really notorious invasive species. It's listed as one of the world's top 100 worst invasive species, which, given there's so many of them, is a very significant ranking. And that's because they are harmful not just environmentally to our natural environment, but also to agriculture, which is a real financial juggernaut in this region, and to our tropical lifestyle, which means that their impacts can also have repercussions on our tourism industry. So basically, no matter who you are in the social far north Queensland landscape, yellow crazy ants are your business and they matter to you. They have their impacts not through a dangerous sting like the fire ants you might be more familiar with, but through their ability to build to really large numbers very rapidly and essentially overtake the native species of ants in their ecosystems. While ants may be small, they're enormously significant to their ecosystems. They fulfill a huge number of different functions. And when our native species are removed, they don't fulfill those functions any longer. So yellow crazy ants disrupt the native ecosystem, the food chain there. They build up to massive interconnected supercolonies. A supercolony is essentially a network of interconnected ant nests that all collaborate. Instead of fighting them, the different colonies get along and build into essentially one massive colony. Because they're collaborating, they're able to channel their energy into foraging for more food instead of competing. And so they build up to super high densities. When I say really high densities, I don't mean like there's a lot of ants on the ground in my yard. I mean up to and exceeding 2,000 individuals in 1 square meter, which is one of the highest densities of ants ever recorded anywhere in the world. That was on Christmas Island. And while they may look less dangerous than some of the bigger, bitier ants, they're only about 4 millimeters long. Their chief weapon is not a bite or sting, it's an acidic spray, that's formic acid, one of the strongest acids in nature, which is to say it's actually fairly weak. It doesn't do much harm to us if the ants are in small numbers, but if you're a baby bird, you can't get away, an insect that breathes through holes along its sides rather than inhaling through lungs like us, that acid spray is a serious danger to you. So all up, yellow crazy ants are a very serious threat to the ecosystems of the wet tropics World Heritage Area, and if left unchecked, they can do untold damage to it, which is why the authority had to do something. Our goal now is not to eradicate yellow crazy ants from Australia, that isn't possible, but to remove them from the surroundings of the World Heritage Area so that it'll remain safe for generations to come. Forgot I had the clicker, sorry. So the main question for many invasive species is how do we stop them from coming back in once we've dealt with them? For yellow crazy ants, the genus that they're in, Anapolepis, which means not a very hairy ant, like a very smooth-skinned ant in English, is actually an African genus, if I remember correctly, but the genetic evidence suggests that this species is from Southeast Asia, although the jury's still out. What I'd like you to notice about this map, I can't leave the bounding box, there is how many other little red dots are spread out across mostly the tropics in the world. All of those areas are places that yellow crazy ants have successfully invaded already. And because in many of these areas they're not controlled, those areas also serve as sources. So the ants are coming not just from in their native range, the green there, they're also coming from all the different red areas all over the map. And from any of those areas, they could be reintroduced back to the World Heritage Area. That's called the bridgehead effect, which is another significant source. So as infestations continue to increase worldwide, the risk is only going to get higher. And the importance of our doing this protective work for the World Heritage Area is only greater. How do the ants spread? Well, the great news for us as managers is they're terrible at spreading themselves. Because they all get along so well, there's no real need for the queens to move far to start a new nest. They just sort of walk a few meters away, or many meters in some cases, bringing a few loyal workers with them and set up a new camp. For us, that means that infestations are generally fairly contiguous, but unfortunately, yellow crazy ants are some of the world's greatest hitchhikers. A queen is only a tiny little thing. It's easy for her to tuck herself away in a potted plant or some green waste that you're just taking to the tip, and wherever that is dumped, a new infestation can spring up. And unfortunately for us, in far north Queensland where we get a lot of floodwaters, the ants also float on water. It doesn't kill them, it spreads them around, so they're highly adaptable and able to take advantage of the conditions that would give most other ant species pause. But human-assisted movement, that's the key one that I would like you to remember, is the key way that the ants have been spread around the region. On their own, a few meters, but with help, hundreds of kilometers in less than a day. So as I mentioned before, this species is a serious threat to the wet tropics World Heritage Area. What I've got up on the map there is a map for you, just demonstrating the layout of some of our infestation areas against the topography and the boundary of the World Heritage Area in the south of Cairns area. So what I would like you to notice here is that the ants are mainly present in areas that humans have interfered with or impacted in some way. And that should make a lot of sense to you, given what we just heard about how they spread. We're the ones that get them places. They don't do it themselves. So the real threat to the World Heritage Area is not that the ants are going to just spring up in the middle of it, wreaking havoc on the native ecosystems. It's that when they've been introduced to backyards or cane fields or parklands down in the foothills, that they will, unchecked, spread up into the World Heritage Area, where it becomes a lot harder to control them. We're trying to catch them while it's ahead. Is anybody not familiar with the invasion curve? Well, fair enough. Thanks for raising your hands. I appreciate the support. For anyone not familiar, this is a general concept that can apply to pretty much all invasive species management at whatever scale. It points out how, as time goes on since a pest or invasive species has established, the area that is occupied and the approximate number of individuals increases exponentially at first, then levels out as capacity is reached. But this curve also approximately describes the money that you're going to have to spend on it to get rid of it, which is why it's such an effective tool for cost-benefit analysis. Can anyone think of an example of an invasive species in Australia that is already way up in asset-based protection, beyond hope? Excellent. We always get cane toad first, and it's a great example. At the nationwide scale, we are not coming back from that one. We are way up in asset-based protection, where all you can do is fence off the things you really don't want them to get into, and then wonder how they did it anyway. But for yellow crazy ants, we're really fortunate to have caught them early enough and gained funding early enough that we are still just done in the eradication stage in the wet tropics area. I need to add the caveat that at the state level, they have been declared ineradicable for a long time. And at the nationwide level, we're probably not going to be getting rid of this species. So if you want to think about it at the national scale, it's kind of a nationwide asset-based protection program where the asset is the entirety of the wet tropics World Heritage Area. Pretty valuable asset if you ask me, 5.6 billion a year or something like that in tourism revenue. So worth it, but also worth noting that we're never going to totally eliminate the risk of local introductions. Now, if we take what we know about the invasion curve and apply it to how this program even happened in the first place, the first detection of yellow crazy ants was back in 2001 at Port of Cairns. And within 10 years, they had spread through the movement of building materials down to Edmonton, building houses, cane trash moving around, et cetera, into massive infestations. Hundreds of thousands of ants spilling out of the woods into people's yards and houses. Pretty significant stuff. And despite those huge impacts, it still took several years for us to gain real significant funding and continued funding, more importantly, for a continuous program. Around 2014, we received our first bait permit, and around 2017, we initiated the first research contract with JCU, which I will talk about more in detail a little bit later, but which some of the audience already know a lot more about than I can tell you. And with those huge developments, the program proper was rolling. So nowadays, we employ 26 full-time and up to 50 seasonal staff. Why are they seasonal? Well, the ants are hard to find during part of the year. Just like us, they really don't like it if it's pelting down rain because they're tiny, so they prefer to just be hidden and only coming out when the weather is clement. We work with a range of industry bodies, different government agencies, not just Department of Environment and Science, there's others, traditional owner groups, volunteer organizations, which Rachel will tell you about, and so many more. As I mentioned before, these ants are everybody's problem, but that means that everybody is going to be our partner in getting rid of them. And that includes you in the audience. We'll touch on later how you can be part of the solution too. As I mentioned before, we work with JCU to do scientific trials on some of the more important points of the program, and we also do our own little experiments to help us better inform our practice to ensure that we're really practicing best practice techniques in ant eradication, protecting the World Heritage Area to the best of our ability. Essentially, our mission is to find the ants and kill them and make sure they're never coming back. And our goal is complete eradication in the Cairns region. I do believe it's possible. We're well on our way, but it's going to take everybody weighing in to get the last few of them stamped out. I mentioned before that we've got a research partnership with JCU. This has been going since 2017 and has only expanded since and had some really fantastic outcomes. A key thing to know about these ants is, I mentioned, they're really adaptable. And that means across the world, in different habitats they've invaded, they can do different behaviors, display different ecologies. So what worked in Northern Territory doesn't necessarily work here. What works for us doesn't work for Townsville. It makes it really hard to manage them because they're always getting on the front foot. So research that's specific to our area has been so crucial in us winning this effort. And down to the mechanics of, this is the details of what I presented at Biosecurity Symposium, by the way, down to the mechanics of how we get rid of the ants. I know this is a really long and complicated looking chart. Do not worry about all the words on it. The key things to remember is that there's the 5 main phases of the eradication effort, that it progresses from detection in the beginning, finding the very first ant and confirming, yep, it's a yellow crazy ant, to the very end of the process, stage 14, where we can finally say they've gone for good from this site. And little do you know, but this process is not as simple as it looks. It can take 8 years or more just for a single site, because it just takes that long to be confident that they've gone. What I'm going to run through now is just a really brief description of how we optimize some of these phase transitions to make sure, for example, once you go from your final surveys to your eradication, that we're totally confident. And that will give you confidence that we're doing our very best, informed by the best available science. So the first thing we've got to optimize is detection. Obviously, we've only got those 50 seasonal staff plus the 26 or so, depending on what the department gives us. We cannot have eyes everywhere. The wet tropics is really big, and that a lot of people live here. There's a lot of properties. There's a huge amount of material moving around that could be moving ants. So how do we make sure that everyone is essentially thinking, breathing, biosecurity, eyes on the ground, looking out for yellow crazy ants and reporting them to us? Well, we have a massive community engagement arm of the organization. You might not traditionally think that community engagement is part of the eradication effort. After all, they're just printing out flyers, not going out and killing ants. But it's one of the most crucial parts of the organization that we have, because this is what ensures that we have people that are really invested in looking for ants actively, that are going to self-manage their movement of high-risk materials, and that are then going to go spread the message to their friends, saving us tons of money. So to tell you a little bit more about one of our many community engagement initiatives, I'd like to just hand you over to Rachel, Community Task Force Coordinator for the Kuranda Crazy Ant Task Force.
Thank you, Jules. G'day, everyone. All right, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Community Task Force. Basically got started up in Kuranda. Everyone been up to Kuranda? Hopefully, online. As you know, a fairly independent community, a lot of alternative lifestyle people up there, very strong indigenous population and communities as well, and generally not trustful of the government on the best days, we would say. Yellow crazy ants showed up in someone's yard. They said, that's kind of funny looking. They called the government and they were confirmed there. Now, at the time, Jules mentioned, particularly in the early days, that the funding was a bit up and down, start and stop. The community in Kuranda got concerned that the government might not have the resources to be able to come and deal with this new infestation. So they organized themselves very quickly, mobilized more than 100 volunteers in the community, did a crowdfunding and raised $20,000 themselves, and went out with training from Wet Tropics and Biosecurity Queensland, went out and surveyed the area themselves, did the treatment themselves, or paid contractors to do the treatment. And you can see there the little frog. I don't know if you can see the yellow crazy ant on it. One of the drivers is the critically endangered Kuranda tree frog that's only found in the streams up there, and the very real concern about what this ant could do to that habitat as well. This is the original infestation site in Russet Park. So in the upper left there, you can see the first survey in 2014-15. The red dots are where we found yellow crazy ants, and the green dots were not. You can see then in 2017, we've had some success in sort of the middle area there, but we've also gone and surveyed to the north and found some more up there. 2024, we're all green, and that's the third year. So 2022, 23, and this year, 2024, we've come back with no yellow crazy ants there, which is a huge relief to people. We haven't declared it eradicated yet, as Jules said. We want to see 3 or 4 solid years of no ants. but we're really close. And I think that's a really good example of how that early intervention by the community and the community owning it themselves and saying, this is our problem, we're not going to sit back and wait for the government to solve it for us, is a really good example for other communities. Now we are fortunate to have a very well-funded program from Wet Tropics Management Authority, and they come in and do the actual treatments of the infestations. The task force is still running, so I'm a part-time coordinator role, which is funded by Wet Tropics, and then everyone else is just volunteers in the community there. One of the things that we do now is still maintaining that vigilance, that frontline surveillance. So we'll be out this Saturday doing a survey, and we do that every other Saturday during the dry season. And also residents will just call me up and say, hey, I've got this weird looking ant, can you come check it out? Also lots of education and awareness, so going to markets, going to schools. I had a lovely time at the Kindy a couple of weeks ago with them learning about ants. And it's keeping up that vigilance. Even when we eradicate them up in Kuranda, we know we're just one truckload of mulch from cans, and they could be back. So that early detection is so, so important to get on top of it and to have success at eradicating them. The other thing that I do in my role is I support the residents who are in the treatment areas and help them liaise with the government and the contractors that are coming in. And I will just put a call out here as well that we do always look forward to volunteers. So we've got surveys coming up on Saturdays. The map over there is the village of Kuranda, and the green dots are the surveys that our volunteer teams have completed this year. And we just walk along the footpath. There's not footpaths in Kuranda, but the verge that is not private property. Looking and luring for the ants. And also, it's really good community engagement because people come out of their house and have a chat with us about what we're doing. We'll go in and check their yard too, or sign them up for a yard check. So if you're interested at all, give me a call about that, and I'll hand back to Jules.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Great summary of that initiative. As I mentioned, just one of our many community engagement initiatives, but a really fantastic example and a reminder of why continuity in vigilance, in funding, and practice is so important for invasive species eradication. You remember I said it takes up to 8 years for one treatment area? Obviously something we want to avoid, but also why it's so important to keep people aware. With housing turnover, people losing interest or forgetting who they engaged with, it's easy to lose that connection. So community engagement, critical stuff. And I highly recommend that you get out and do one of these sidewalk surveys, verge surveys, however you want to describe it. You will be really surprised what you find. And you'd be surprised at the number of electric ant infestations, just for example, that these surveys have turned up. So you have the chance to be part of something really significant. Now, on community engagement, I have exciting news for you, which is that there's not just free drinks and nibbles, but also free giveaway items for those who are present in person. Sorry, Townsville. I've brought along examples of a couple of our really exciting community engagement products. First is the ant identification flyer, which just gives you a couple of similar looking species. This goes out to almost every member of the public we talk to at events and even just on call-outs inspecting people's yards. And it shows you some of the usual suspects that people will be familiar with. It gives you some more information on how to identify the yellow crazy ant. Second is a really cool product called Ant Zone. One of the most frequent questions that we get is, so where are the ants actually? What do I have to do about it? Once you know how to identify them, you next need to know where you're looking. So what Ant Zone is, it's a really cool live web map. If you just scan through with your smartphone or visit the website listed on here, you can see a live map of the current confirmed yellow crazy ant and electric ant infestations in the area. And if you click on them, you can learn more information like what you need to do about moving material in or out of these areas. It's even got locations of all the tips that will take your contaminated green waste as well. So we're making it really easy to do the right thing, stay informed, and to protect your property. Highly valuable, not just to people in related industries like earth moving, gardening, but to just anyone that wants to stay aware. And I've got these to hand out at the end as well. And finally, a product that our team is really proud of, which is the field guide to ants of the wet tropics. While it looks a bit like a kid's book, I promise it's full of fun facts for all ages. These are free, and they come with an ant scientist sticker if you read the whole thing. So I highly recommend you pick one up. There's tons of absolutely amazing ant species and fun ant facts to learn in it. You'd be astonished by the diversity that's found just in our wet tropics region. And if you want to see some of these species in the book live and up close, just sign up to one of the sidewalk surveys, because Kuranda is one of the best places to find them. So these are just a couple of the examples of really cool community engagement products that we use to keep the message fresh and tailor it to different audiences, from kids all the way up to people that are working age or in retirement homes. Now, it's not just the community we engage with, but also industry, as I mentioned before. Main industries in the region include, but are not limited to, earth-moving, building, especially right now south of town, and crucially the cane industry. Is anyone familiar with how cane is harvested? Yeah, so this huge machine here, there's not a huge number of them in the region. That's the cane harvester. There's only a selected handful of harvesters and harvester contractors, and they're massive. It is hard to clean them down. So when you're moving from paddock to paddock, it's very easy to get ants caught up in there and transported right across town. Because cleaning down these machines is a huge ask. We want to make sure that while our cane industry partners are doing the right thing and they're being careful about contaminated material, we're not asking them too much. So we created the traffic light system map, which color codes all the cane paddocks in the region, explaining which ones have to be cleaned down when you're moving out of, so that harvester contractors can prioritize where they're going. It's already a complicated process. Why not make it harder? And the great news is we have a very successful partnership with our sugarcane industry. We have a whole liaison officer role dedicated to it. It's a fabulous example of where a relationship could have gone wrong from the start, but has instead turned into something really positive. And now the benefits are not just that we've been able to predict and locate early at least 8 infestations, catching them before they spread, but also the cane industry benefits from improved biosecurity, pest resistance, disease resistance, etc. So smiles all around. Now that we've talked about finding the ants, what do we do once we find them? Well, we find them and then we have to kill them. It's a very simple way to do it. We just use we'll go back a bit. That little brown grain in the middle is a bait granule. We bait them with a poison bait. It's called Antoff. It's an unregistered product, and the active ingredient is fipronil. Who is familiar with fipronil? Yeah, a little bit notorious maybe around the world. You might be thinking, didn't I hear about that on the ABC? It's killing all the bees. Well, yes, sorry about that, but we have found this to be the most effective product in treating yellow crazy ants. There's a couple of reasons why we use this one. We've trialed a number of different products from the very start of the program. This one provided the greatest success, both short-term knockdown and long-term getting rid of the ants. But also, it's really important to monitor for off-target impacts. So we've worked with JCU to quantify and measure whether there are impacts to other insects, like, again, the precious bees and other flying insects. We found that there weren't any using this one. Whether there are impacts on other groups of invertebrates like beetles and things, and again, we found that there really weren't significant impacts. And then finally, to understand what are the impacts on the native ant species. And fortunately, we've found that there is a degree of community recovery after treatment, as once the yellow crazy ants are removed from the area that they took over, the other native species can kind of come back in from outside. Of course, it takes them a long time to do that, so the answer is still evolving as we collect more data, but it's going to be a very robust answer once we finally have it conclusively. We cannot just treat once. Obviously, it's just the same as in your kitchen. You put down just one treatment, you won't be rid of them forever. So we do 5 rounds just to start with as protocol. We put down the treatment by hand or by helicopter. This is an area, it's just a map of one of the treatment areas treated by hand, and all those little yellow lines are field staff that walked out to spread treatment by hand on the ground at a specified rate. If you think that looks easy, think again, that is actually Green Hill. It's an old volcano cone. So it was not easy country to work in, thick with brush. There's ants everywhere and trying to spread the treatment evenly. It's just an example of the high quality that we require from a treatment before we can move that area on to the next stage. And finally, I mentioned that we spread the treatment by hand and by helicopter. The helicopter is just one way of helping us cover a larger area more quickly. Why is it important to do that? Because once the treatment comes down, the ants eat it and they start dying, they really tend to lose their appetite for the thing that's killing all their sisters. So we really need to get it done over a couple of days to reduce bait shyness or the effect that ants stop taking the bait up. It's easy on a property like that volcano cone where just a couple of people are involved. But think about an area that has maybe 800 to 900 residential lots. Some of them might not be home. Some of them might not want you on there. Trying to hit them all just over a 3-day span is immensely difficult, and it's testament to our field team that they're able to get it done. Finally, what happens after you kill the ants? You've got to make sure that they're gone. And we do that through surveillance. You will notice here that not all surveys are created equal. The reason for that is that the first couple of surveys, we are still expecting to find ants. You put that treatment down evenly, or as evenly as you can, but that does not mean that all the ants are going to die. There may be a little pocket over here that just wasn't hungry that day. Maybe in this habitat, the bait just bounced off because there was a steep rock or some other kind of reason. We always expect that there are going to be little patches left over. And so when we find them, we treat them with spot treatment, and then they're reincorporated into the treatment area. Once they are definitely gone, we're just moving on to the very final stages of making sure the ants are eliminated. Now, why is it, you might ask, we don't just check once and call it done? Well, ants can be fickle, and we can't be 100% sure that we've found them all just if we don't detect them. They could just not be hungry that day, again. They could be not out for a number of reasons: bad weather, bad temperature, illness in the colony, whatever it might be. You've got to check a bunch of times to make sure that you're sure. So along with James Cook University, we've undertaken some research into the exact numeric probability of detection using our surveillance techniques. And through that, we were able to ascertain what is the ideal number of surveys through which we can determine the highest confidence in true yellow crazy ant absence without overspending on the staff cost and wages to send people out and survey, which is really boring, but really important. So just a couple of examples of what surveys look like. I didn't explain before, but surveillance is not simply going out and looking for the ants. You've got to tempt them out of their hiding. As I mentioned, they're very fickle. So we do that through a delicious ant's favorite mixture of 50-50 beef and liver cat food, Cole's brand, and apricot jam, or I think strawberry and raspberry, also Cole's brand. That's what they prefer. We did trial this scientifically. They're very picky. Blend it up into a fine, disgusting paste and put down little tiny drops of it on the ground marked with flags. That will draw the ants out of hiding to feed on it. And when we return to those lure points, we can ascertain whether they're yellow crazy ants or another species present there. We do that every 5 meters across the landscape, which, as I mentioned, the wet tropics is pretty big. So I think last year we racked up over 1 million separate discrete survey points, which is a massive effort. And again, just demonstrates to you the scale that we're working on here. The surveys have to be really close together, tightly spaced. 5 meters is based on the foraging distance of yellow crazy ants. And if you leave any gaps, you can't be sure that you didn't just miss one. I know you probably can't see my pointer very well, but over there on the bottom right, there in a little tiny gap that was a patch of really difficult terrain, there was in fact one remnant point, yellow crazy ants found on one single lure. And if we hadn't returned to make that survey a little bit tighter, we never would have found them. So it just demonstrates the importance of the correct protocol. Finally, what happens if you've treated them and treated them and treated them ad nauseum and there's still ants? Well, it does happen. We call these sites persistent sites, and there's a number of reasons they could happen. Maybe the habitat's just super good. Maybe the bait's getting wet, the ants aren't interested. Whatever the reason, there are always going to be a couple of persistent sites. They don't mean that you can't move the site on to eradication. They just mean that you have to separate that out and treat it specially. So they tend to happen in really complex areas, lots of material moving around, like this area in which there was a creek line, material being moved by flooding, earth moving, building, etc., potentially moving the ants around and making the habitat quite complex. So this is an evolving area of research for us, being able to predict and better understand and treat persistent sites. Finally, the most exciting stage of it all, when we're able to go to the government and say, hey, we didn't totally misspend that 24 million. We did, in fact, eradicate the ants. And they ask, how can you be sure that it was a good investment? This is a very important question to answer accurately because it keeps us accountable not just to the government, but to all the taxpayers of Queensland. We take it very seriously. So the eradication decision here, it's not necessarily a checklist. It's more like an enormous decision tree of all the different things you've got to think about for every single treatment site before you can move it to eradication. So we're thinking about not just the quality of the surveys and the quality of the treatment that happened and what product, when it happened during the year, what was the population level of the ants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A huge number of considerations go into it, and analysis through geospatial work mapping as well. In some circumstances, we determine that the surveillance hasn't been adequate and we have to deploy additional surveillance methods. For example, we have 4 detection dogs. I didn't bring any with me today, sorry, but they are always the public's favorite. And they have, in some circumstances, a higher probability of detecting the ants than our field staff would. They're also just better suited to some environments. You can see one of the dogs, Fury, here on this pile of broken rocks. It's a lot quicker for her to survey that than it is for us to shut down the entire quarry to send a field team of 5 through. So being able to have multiple survey techniques in your toolbox is another key aspect of a successful eradication program. Finally, a new thing that we've been incorporating with the decision analysis or the decision support is an initiative led between us and James Cook University to develop a spatial representation of the probability of yellow crazy ant absence, or I should say, in fact, the confidence in absence. Being able to assign a numeric value is a lot more solid and easier to tell people than showing them this massive decision tree and having them pick out all the typos. So what you see on this map is a color-coded representation of the likelihood that the ants are actually gone based on the probability of detection of every survey that's ever happened there and where those points were. And in addition, our understanding of the suitability of the habitat to yellow crazy ants persisting. Obviously, there's a huge number of assumptions that feed into this, and analysis of the numeric value of those and how they'll impact it is still ongoing, but for the moment, it looks pretty good, hey? And in fact, this particular map, as a decision support tool, supported us to declare eradication at this property just last year. So huge success so far and still evolving. Watch this space. Finally, I might have hinted at this a little bit before, given the title of the presentation is a homegrown success story, but is it working? Is detection to eradication actually a success? Short answer is yes. It does work. To date, we've had at least 50 discrete detections, 50 different treatment areas, and we've eradicated a fair few of them, totaling up to 480 hectares of area at which ants had infested previously and at which they're now gone. We're totally confident based on that huge process I just ran you through. To give you a little bit of context, it may not sound like a very big area, but this is actually the largest area of yellow crazy ant infestation ever eradicated in world history, and it more than doubles, in eradication we had just this year, more than doubles the previous area eradicated worldwide. It is a massive achievement. I don't mind sort of trumpeting that to everyone involved because it's a really good example of what a correctly funded biosecurity program can achieve with the involvement of its community and research partnerships. Oh, I mentioned those things. So it just demonstrates how good science, leading the way, and good partnerships with their community, keeping people invested, will lead you to future success. This is why I said earlier that I do believe we will succeed in eradicating them. As you can see, they're already almost gone. It's just going to take those last few ant spots to declare eradication for the whole region. So finally, what happens once the ants are all gone? Well, given that our name is the Yellow Crazy Ant Eradication Program, it kind of sounds that we're going to be putting ourselves out of a job. And that is the case. We're only going to be continuing to do this work until the ants are confirmed gone from the Cairns region, at which point the program will have to cease functioning. And control of the species will then pass to local councils, local government, and into the hands of Indigenous ranger groups working across many of the areas surrounding our World Heritage Area and within it. But don't worry, we're not too concerned about that because not only are these groups really capable, we've also been already working with them for years to get them ready for this point. We do lots of trainings every year with local government, helping them understand how to identify the ants, high-risk material, identifying pathways for spread, and the Indigenous ranger groups as well. In fact, we just had one this morning that Rachel was at. So we're really active in this space, and we're confident that passing this control program on will enable our partners across the region to continue watching the borders and protecting the World Heritage Area indefinitely. Yes, the video worked. So finally, I know that was a total whirlwind through the program, but I would like to just take some questions. I didn't answer the questions yet.
Yeah, I have to take the microphone off of you because we use it here for our... So thank you very much, Jules. Really enjoyed that. Really good. Extremely smooth, excellent talk. Questions, anybody? Okay, Susan, and I'm going to have to repeat your question so it gets picked up. Go ahead.
So thank you. That was an excellent talk. Thank you very much. I was interested in what's the distribution
Yeah, go ahead, and you'll have to repeat your question.
The question is, what's the distribution of yellow crazy ants in Australia outside of the wet tropics region? Well, they were detected a lot earlier than this, both in Townsville, other locations down the east coast, so you'll see them in Brisbane, Gold Coast, etc. But they really like it warm, so in New South Wales, they've only yet been found in Lismore. You might know the place because of its history with flooding that has complicated management, yes, but they haven't gone further south than that. And in the Northern Territory, there have been eradication programs and control programs underway for many years now, which have informed a lot of our early work as well. That's under the auspices of Ben Hoffman, who does a lot of the work up there. So, and you mentioned I guess I just wanted to touch on this, how do we know worldwide that their distribution is Southeast Asian? It's a lot of genetic evidence, but also some behavioral and ecological evidence as well, so fairly conclusive.
Gentleman here. Yeah.
Oh, I know, you had a great talk there. Tell me, I'm up in Toronto, just in Management Toronto. There's a big development up on Fallon Road, near the tennis court. Yeah, I guess you can see you're aware of it. How are things going up there with crazies or electrics?
The question is, regarding the development on Fallon Road, how are things going with crazy ants or electric ants? Rachel, did you want to take this one? Just so people are aware, electric ants is a totally different program. We are so lucky here in North Queensland to have multiple invasive ants happening at once. Great. But fortunately, there are at least 2 programs that are well funded enough to have a public presence, so it's a blessing and curse.
Yeah, thank you. So that Fallon Road development, we don't have yellow crazy ants detected there. It is a declared electric ant restricted zone, and it's a very large one. There's a number of other very large electric ant zones that were picked up just in the last year around it. Most of the stuff in Kuranda is directly traceable back to materials or landscapers coming up from Cairns, which is, as Jules said, why we do a lot of toolbox talks with all of the earth-moving landscaping businesses up there. So that is under treatment at the moment.
Interesting. I mean, a lot of people take their dogs up there.
Actually, a really good question, one I can answer. Thanks for that. So on Christmas Island, the density of yellow crazy ants has increased in recent decades due to the impacts of a different invasive species, the yellow-lac scale insect. If you're familiar with scale insects, it's a little bug that attaches to plants, sucks the juice out, and essentially poos out sugar water, which ants just love. So they look after the scale insects, causing the numbers to boom. Then ant numbers boom because more sugar, and it just kind of snowballs on to huge cascades of ants. So on Christmas Island, the ants were present before the scale showed up. Numbers were fairly low. Once the scale did show up, they just took off to plague proportions. So the control effort of ants on Christmas Island is not actually about killing the ants anymore, because it's simply not possible. They've introduced a small parasitic wasp that kills the scale insect, and by eliminating that source of food, the ants are no longer able to reach those catastrophically high densities. When they're at lower densities, they're somewhat relatively innocuous. And so the impacts, for example, of the red crabs, which are part of the World Heritage values of that place, are no longer being observed as frequently. So into the future, eradication of the ants will not be possible there, but the control via parasite wasp of the scale insect, and therefore of the ants, will continue probably indefinitely. And I wanted to just follow up. You had another comment about the Kuranda.
Sorry, I haven't noticed any signs of it, saying this is electricated territory. Is that, sorry, it's haven't noticed. But if that's electricated spot, should there not be signs saying it's up there?
Yes, so around the borders of electric ant zones, there will be signs, but typically they're on the street. What we recommend everyone do, if you go onto the ant zone map, you can have a look around at all the declared ones around your property. But yeah, certainly that's an area that we're trying to increase awareness about. Because we do have a growing number of electric ants in Kuranda, Spiuakoa, Mariba. So trying to increase awareness in the general public, as you say, even if it's not your property, you may use that property. Yeah.
Other questions? Jules, I wanted to ask quickly, that you mentioned something called concept, and I hadn't really heard that before. Could you say a little bit more about that and what that means?
Yeah, I don't not necessarily want to poach the topic because I know am I correct in that there's an upcoming publication relating to bait shyness and yellow crazy ants? So I don't want to scoop that. There may or may not be. Yeah, but essentially, the ants, they may be tiny with incredibly small brains, but together, they're able to do pretty rational decision making. So for them, because in a heavily infested area, all the different nests are sort of interconnected, workers are mingling between information's passing along, and food is also passing along, food resources. So when the bait comes down in only one patch of the area, the ants that eat that get killed, but there's an association then that if it's applied too far in the future on another area that was connected or proximal, that the yellow crazy ants there won't pick it up.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. It implies communication, it implies learning, it implies avoidance. I mean, to me, that's a little bit, I don't want to talk to Lori Lack about that. That just sounds,
There's some really interesting research on decision-making in ants as well, just how they do sort of path analysis, path shortening, assessing different resources. It's worth looking into. And of course, this is totally unrelated, but if anyone's really interested in ant navigation, look up the desert ants. The Cataglyphus is their genus. There's some fabulous work on how they count their steps and know where they're going in a completely featureless desert expanse. But that's off topic. Do we have anything on topic to ask prior to closing remarks?
The role of drones and AI monitoring program, do you use?
The role of drones. Excellent question. Yes, we do. Recently. So we didn't in the past. It was all that big helicopter. The reason for that was, as you saw, the treatment areas are absolutely huge. Hectares and hectares and hectares, massive sugarcane paddocks, and a little drone buzzing around. There's no way it's going to cover it all. But as we've been so very successful, there are very few big ones left. Most of the areas left are spot treatments. Oh, I just realized I'm outside the box. Sorry. Spot treatments, small areas, or in sensitive areas along creeks. And it just makes more sense to use a drone for those instead of hiring out a helicopter to do one little spot and then go back to the pad. So we have purchased an agricultural drone fairly recently. We put one staff member through pilot training, and he now deploys it pretty regularly to do treatments. And in fact, there was just one, I think, in Ken's post a few weeks back, where we had our first successful full treatment area treated by our drone. So we've done a fair bit of analysis on that as well, making sure it puts out exactly the right rate, at the right height, that it's not running into trees, that it's not going to slow down and put more at the edge, etc. So we've done a bit of analysis just to make sure it's a good use of the drone as well.
Other questions? Okay, well, Jules, thank you, and, sorry. Rachel, Jules and Rachel, thank you both very much. Fantastic presentation, one of the best we've had in a long time.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. I also just wanted to let you know, I brought live crazy ants for you to have a look at. They're in the box at the back. We'll have them out at the drinks and nibbles, and we have... No, they're in the box. The box is locked, last time I checked. We've also got freebies of the Ant Zone and the Amazing Ants Field Guide. Did I mention it comes with a really cute sticker? Please come pick one up. We have got to get rid of them. We've got like 1,000, so don't miss it.